Welcome to the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast, where it is never too early for fantasy football. My name is Jeff. As always, thank you for downloading, listening, liking, and commenting on our podcast videos. Please join our community by subscribing to us on the socials. Our handle on all platforms is at N2eFantasy. We are also available on all major podcasting apps by searching N2eFantasy. Alex, what do we have on today's show?
Fantasy Football Podcast. We are covering any major news and rumors for this week, which is the beginning of the free agency and during the offseason. So we'll be going over that. We'll be talking about anyone who is franchise tagged and notable players who were not. We'll also go over the NFL scouting combines risers and fallers as it relates to offensive fantasy players. So we'll definitely cover some quarterbacks, wide receivers, running backs, tight ends. But Jeff, it's a big day. There were some signings today and some notable franchise taggees and some guys who weren't tagged. Let's get started with the first signing of the week. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers re-signed Mike Evans. He's not going anywhere. He got a 2-year deal. It's about $52 million, and 35 of it is guaranteed. Was this a good deal? Do you feel like something could have been improved with this process, or he should have gone somewhere else? What do you think?
So I believe that Mike Evans could have gotten more on the open market, probably closer to 2 years, 60 million. But when you really look at the deal and kind of what Tampa and Florida offers, they offer no state tax. So is it really worth jumping up the extra 8 million just to have that all taxed and taken away over the next 2 years? So I think he looked at it. Tampa's his home. Why move your home? This kind of allows him to end the career that he has in Tampa if he wants to. The only question I have about this deal is why was it not done a week earlier? Because that would have saved Tampa 7 million against the cap and dead cap that Mike Evans carried that they can't get rid of now. So it's just an interesting way to conduct business to do it later, and ended up costing them an extra 7 million against the cap.
Yeah, I don't know why they didn't get it done earlier. Maybe they were too far apart, and once he was on the verge of leaving, they upped their offer. I don't know.
Yeah, they definitely did. I don't know why they didn't up their offer to try to save some of that dead cap money though, because even if they meet him in the middle at 3.5 million, like I just feel like they would rather put that in his pocket versus uh have it hit the cap without any usage.
Yep. We have a second signing that we're aware of at this point, and that is the Houston Texans and their tight end Dalton Schultz have agreed to a 3-year, $36 million deal. Dalton had a $6 million deal last year, a 1-year prove-it deal, and bet on himself, and it came out big for him. So he benefited from this being a weak tight end class and a weak tight end free agent market. So he got paid. As a Texans fan, I'm happy with it. I think it's a solid deal, and I don't have any major issues with it. Jeff, what do you think of this deal as a third party?
So this essentially doubles his salary from last year, which he made just over $6 million. Now he'll be making 12 million a year. The first 2 years are essentially guaranteed, as 23.5 million of this deal is guaranteed. So by math, that leaves a whopping 12.5 not guaranteed, which would be the last year of the deal. So this at minimum seems like a 2-year deal. And I think it's really important at this juncture to keep the core that has been established around CJ Stroud. So that is where we are with Schultz here. Do you feel like they have good chemistry between him and Stroud, or do you believe that it was, if you don't believe that he's one of the top 3 targets on the team right now?
No, I think he's one of the top 3 guys when everyone's healthy. I think that they'll bring in another wide receiver, most likely, in the draft. But I like him. I think he's been pretty useful for Stroud, and he played through a neck injury last year. So I think that's healthy. He can be even better this year. So I like bringing that consistency from Stroud's first year over to the next year. So keeping everyone together and adding to him, I like it a lot. I'm happy with it.
Yeah. The next thing that the Texans can do is upgrade their backfield, and that'll be really interesting to see how they do that going forward, especially with so many running backs on the free agent market.
None of them were tagged officially. None of the running backs were tagged. So
All right.
Barkley,
So
Barkley, Pollard, Josh Jacobs, Henry, Swift. None of those guys were tagged, all of them free agents.
That's exciting. You would have to think at least one would go to the Texans. I don't know which one, but you would have to think at least one would go there. But speaking of the franchise tag, going along with, we announced last week that T. Higgins had been tagged by the Bengals, which we notated that that was very awkward how early that Higgins had been tagged. But now, fellow wide receiver Michael Pittman for the Colts also received a franchise tag. This in the version of the non exclusive tag, which allows him to discuss a contract with other organizations and sign an offer sheet where at that point the Colts will have a opportunity to match it, or they will receive 2 first round picks in compensation for Michael Pittman. So kind of an interesting strategy, a way for the Colts to save money if they go on the 1-year tag, but also gives Pittman a chance to go see what his market may or may not be out there.
Yeah, they were close to a deal, but they were running short on time, is what I saw. Uh, they couldn't get it done in time, so they went with the franchise tag, and they're working on a deal right now. I don't even know if Pittman gets to the point where he even talks to other teams. I think that he and the Colts work something out. So I'm not worried about him going anywhere at all. The Colts pretty clear that they want to keep him, and Pittman has said all the right things about staying with the Colts. It doesn't make sense for them to move on from him. He's the only reliable receiver on the Colts roster at all right now. I mean, Josh Downs could continue to develop. We could see more flashes from Alec Pierce, but Pittman is the go-to number one wide receiver, and he looked like he was Anthony Richardson's favorite target before Anthony Richardson got hurt. I don't see him going anywhere, and I like Pittman. And I think he'll be an interesting fantasy player going forward.
I have to ask you, which time are you referring to of Richardson getting hurt? Was it the first, second, or third time in 4 games last year?
Uh, I knew you were going to do this, Jeff, and it doesn't matter. He's going to be healthy next year, so don't worry about it.
So Spotrac has his value at 4 years, 90 million, so a $22 million average market value. So we'll see if he gets anywhere close to that, but that's where Spotrac has his current market value. And I do believe he'll get somewhere in the ballpark of that. And just so we are clear, T. Higgins is actually a little bit lower on the average annual value of 18.6 million of current market value for T. Higgins, according to Spotrac. So we'll see which one gets the higher value, but as of right now, Higgins is on the 1-year, $21.8 million deal, and Pittman is on a 1-year. Spotrac also has the 21.8, but I know that he's on the non-exclusive tag, so we'll see what that means for his actual value right now.
Well, it's probably heavily influenced by the most recent year production, and Higgins is coming off his worst year in the league. Pittman's coming off his best year in the league. So I can understand why those numbers are generated. I think a lot of people have them on the same level, and we've had this debate offline of who's better, Pittman or Higgins. I think they're pretty close, but I'd take Michael Pittman over Higgins, and you're the opposite. So just curious why you think Higgins is better than Pittman.
Because I think in the right offense, T. Higgins is a true number one, and I'm not sure Michael Pittman is a true number one on a team, but we won't really know that unless we can see a full year with their exact quarterbacks, and we won't know that unless Higgins is the number one for a team.
Yeah, I just think Michael Pittman has had 4 different starting quarterbacks. So each year he's had a different starting quarterback. Those quarterbacks have either been benched or gotten hurt at some point and had the backups play. So he's played with like 8 or 9 different quarterbacks and had pretty level production the entire time. And Higgins has had Joe Burrow all 4 years. So I think it's very dependent. I think Higgins, we haven't seen what he can be in a system without Joe Burrow. And Pittman's had different coaching staffs, different quarterbacks. He's had Old Man Rivers. He's had Matt Ryan, 38-year-old Matt Ryan, not prime Matt Ryan. He's had Carson Wentz after he was bounced around. And then he had a brief glimpse of rookie Anthony Richardson, and then journeyman Gardner Minshew. So I think there's only room to go up for Pittman, and Higgins will have to be on a different team to see what he can be.
Absolutely. So It does look like Higgins and Pittman are scheduled to make the $21.8 million this year. So perhaps T. Higgins was also the non-exclusive franchise tag as well. Cannot find information online which tag it was.
And we can shift gears a little bit and talk about the other big news, one of the other big news items out there that doesn't directly tie into fantasy, but indirectly affects fantasy. And that is Eagles future Hall of Fame center Jason Kelce, the brother of Travis Kelce, retired uh, over the weekend and had a heartfelt conference for all his Eagles fans. He's one of the few Eagles players that their wild fan base overwhelmingly loves and supports. So that's pretty interesting. So he's one of the best centers ever to ever play, and I think, and I'm sure that you think as well, it's dramatically going to affect how that offense is run and whether or not they can do their brotherly shove or the tush push play. So does that mean Jalen Hurts won't be effective in those situations and they're still going to try? Or are they going to now hand it to the running back in short yardage situations? Like, how do you think that changes their offense?
So I think this automatically puts the center position as a priority for the Eagles this year. So they're going to have to go out and find somebody with a similar skill set of a Jason Kelce, because he was at least 40% of the success rate of the tush push, brotherly shove, whatever we're calling it these days. So, and then obviously Hurts is a big part of that as well, and he's a squat master, which, I mean, all of that driving from the legs is kind of what he gears all of his workouts to. So I think without Kelce, it's going to be at least 40% less effective. So they're going to have to go find a replacement for Kelce that can do the tush push and see what that means for the Philly offense going forward. I am along the lines of willing to discount some of Jalen Hurts' rushing touchdowns this year. I don't know about rushing yards because you don't get a ton of rushing yards on the brotherly shove, but you can get a lot of rushing touchdowns out of that. So I might cap some of Jalen Hurts' rushing touchdowns because of this. I don't really think it hurts Jalen Hurts' passing value. I don't think it hurts his passing touchdowns, although he might throw a couple more passing touchdowns because he's not running it in as much. So it also leaves open like a potential for a pounder like Derrick Henry to sign with the Eagles, because that could change how they want to run their offense going forward. But it has also been notated at the league level, there is no push to get rid of the tush push play. So there's no momentum to actually banning this play. And I say that that's a good thing because there's only one team that does it effectively. And why would you want to ban a move where one team has perfected it? Versus, it's not like an automatic for the other 31 teams. So it's not like an automatic move play for every single team. So we'll see what comes out of this, but I do believe that they're going to have to really search high and low for a center that has a similar skill set to Travis Kelce. His brother, Jason Kelce. Sorry, got Travis Kelce on the mind because of Taylor Swift.
No, it's okay. I think that you pivoted pretty well. So now we got to talk about crazy contract dead cap hits in quarterbacks, ironically. Um, Broncos. Sean Payton told the brass to move on from Russell Wilson. They're releasing him, creating $85 million in dead cap. Sounds like they're going to split it and do it as a post June. I don't know if he has to actually sit around until June or if it's just an accounting declaration, but that's a lot of money. Jeff, is this the right move? Is this a good move? Like, what do you think?
Oh boy, so this is a huge negative for the Broncos because they're going to take $85 million in dead cap over 2 years. They're reportedly deciding how they want to divide it up, because there's one way where they can have the bigger cap hit this year, and then there's another way where they can have the bigger cap hit next year. Either way, that's 30 million one year, 50 million another year. That is just dead cap. So it's ugly. It's going to hamstring them from being able to sign a quarterback this offseason. So no Kirk Cousins, no Baker Mayfield, none of those players going over to the Broncos. And it may hamstring them next year from signing any big time deals as well. So depending on which way that they go, if they go with the bigger cap hit next year, that might might take them out of the race again next year for any big ticket items. So I do believe that Sean Payton deserves to be on the hot seat right now. Because what happens now if he handpicks a quarterback, and that quarterback does worse than Russell Wilson did last year, where he called it so big of a disaster that they had to take an $85 million dead cap hit. So Russell Wilson now gets to go find a team and go play for the veteran minimum for that team because his offset language in his contract. So he has no incentive to sign a deal for more than the veteran minimum, and he doesn't want to take Denver off the hook for paying him. So wherever he goes, he could go to a cap strap team and start for them and have no issues. And it's kind of an interesting little bit of information there. He can start negotiating with teams right now as per terms of his upcoming release. So they've virtually given him every right to go start negotiating right now. So he gets a little bit of a jump on the free agents as of next Monday during the legal tampering period. He actually gets a little bit of a head start on that. So he actually gets to beat Kirk Cousins out to start negotiating with teams now. So might be a little bit of an advantage. What teams do you think are in play for Russ?
Oh man. First, I just want to say if Sean Payton doesn't work out either, along with Russ, that's 7 draft picks that the Broncos have just washed away, 3 of them being first round picks. So that and the huge cap hit from cutting Russell just looks bad for the organization in general. I don't know how the general manager still has a job. Um, I think it probably would have made more sense financially to try to keep Russell and keep using him, but they decided to move on. So kudos to them for, I guess, being firm in their decision making. As far as where Russ could go, the Steelers and the Raiders seem like the most obvious landing spots. If Kirk Cousins leaves Minnesota, I think Minnesota could be a landing spot because Minnesota would be probably desperate to get someone in there.
Do it
Pittsburgh's
relatively
probably the
cheap.
best. Yeah, Pittsburgh's probably the best spot just because everything seems like it's already set up except for the quarterback, and he can do some of his freelance plays if he wants to there and still be way better than Kenny Pickett. At the same time, they can keep Kenny Pickett to continue to develop behind Russell. So that's the most ideal spot, I would guess. What about you?
So definitely Pittsburgh, as you had mentioned. The Raiders are a possibility. The Falcons are a possibility. The Buccaneers are a possibility. There's just a lot of teams with possibilities right now. So there's a lot of quarterback opening spots right now, and that's kind of interesting. What's really interesting is he's has got such a low cap hit for this upcoming year that the Giants could take a stab at him and replace Daniel Jones without taking a lot of cap this year, and then they move off of Daniel Jones next year when he doesn't have any guaranteed money left. So that would be an interesting spot that I don't know if he would do it, but I do believe his wife would not mind moving to New York to one of the bigger cities. So that's just something to keep in mind.
I think New York's looking for a rookie.
It's possible, but again, they have Daniel Jones' contract, and this is a way around Daniel Jones' contract. And I do think Russ is an upgrade from Daniel Jones, at least not from a passing standpoint.
I don't know. I'm not trying to talk up Daniel Jones, but I think Russ looked good this past year because of Sean Payton and looked bad the previous year under Hackett. That being said, I mean, if Dable is the coach that people think he is, then he should still look good for Dable. But I think that they're pretty dead set on a rookie, and I think Russ is going to go to a team that potentially has more to offer on their roster than what the Giants currently have. So there are teams that are closer to competing, and I think that's the Steelers, and I think that that's potentially the Raiders. I'm higher on the Raiders going into the next year than you are. I think Atlanta is looking at Kirk Cousins or Justin Fields. I think those are the 2 guys they like more than Russell Wilson. They may even want to draft a rookie over Russell Wilson. I don't know. The Steelers just make too much sense.
Yep, absolutely. Although there is reports out that the Steelers aren't interested in any of the veteran quarterbacks.
So dumb. This is just dumb. They deserve to lose if that's their mentality.
Yeah, I'm hoping the report they're just people grasping at straws, and we'll get the real answer coming up in about a week. So that'll be fun. But there's some really good landing spots for Russ coming up. So I do believe that he'll get a starting gig for 2024. I do believe Kirk Cousins and Baker Mayfield will probably get starting gigs for 2024 as well. Kirk for sure, but Baker most likely as well. But if you're Tampa, let me ask you this real quick. If you're Tampa, would you rather go with Baker Mayfield for 35 million per season or Russell Wilson for 1 million this year?
Well, they looked really good with Baker.
Yeah, but he's
So
going to
yeah, I
command
mean,
like 35.
yeah, I
The
mean
$1
that's
million
tough.
price tag is so attractive.
Yeah, but we don't know that's actually what it's going to be. Like that's pure speculation. He very
It'll
well
be
could get more than
close.
that.
It'll be close because he doesn't have any incentive to give the Broncos any cap relief or cash relief either. Because the first like 39 million are paid by the Broncos, so unless he's going to get paid more than 39 million this year, then he just might as well sign for the veteran minimum wherever he goes.
Yeah, I feel like the Buccaneers already know what they have in Baker, and they might want to stick with that. I think it's easy for us on the outside to say, oh, well, Russell's only going to take a $1 million deal. Is Russell at 1 million better than Baker at 35? Especially if you can build around that, maybe. But if money's not an option, if money's not an object, I should say, then Baker's better than Russell at this point in their careers, which is crazy to say, but it's the truth.
Right. So we will see what happens. The speculation is going to run wild over the next 7 days. And I love it. And we're hoping to get some answers for you by our next podcast episode. But that brings us to our Kirk Cousins that we've already started talking about. So if Kirk Cousins doesn't re-sign with the Vikings, what team could you see him going to sign with there, Alex?
Well, we've talked about it over the last couple weeks. Atlanta is the number one other option for him to go to. As you've pointed out, his wife's family lives in Atlanta. They Kurt got married in Georgia, so in some regards, it makes a lot of sense. There have been a lot of people around the social media space claiming that there is significant signs that they're heavily interested in moving to Atlanta. I'm sure they're doing their due diligence and they're going to interview and meet with them and do all of that. There's also been talk that Kirk is upset with the lack of urgency and the lack of guarantees and interest seemingly from the Vikings to get a deal done. So at this point, he's going to explore other options. And there's significant downside for the Vikings for playing it this way because if he signs with the Falcons or signs with any other team, the Vikings would have to eat a $28.5 million dead cap, which is not something that they need right now at this point to be down a quarterback, lose almost $30 million in cap space, and have to re-sign Justin Jefferson, who now knows they don't have a quarterback in that scenario. Not a good situation for them at all. It makes all the sense in the world for them to try to re-sign Kirk Cousins as soon as possible, and that may mean backing off their stance against fully guaranteed contracts because they might have to do that to keep Kirk. So I don't know how you feel about the situation, but I think the Vikings have played this in the worst possible way.
Yeah, the Vikings really better start ponying up and really quickly. So I think he was asking for what 2 years, 90 million. We said so.
Hmm.
If that's all he's willing to accept is a 2 year, 90 million. I know you said throw third year on there, but if that's all he's willing to accept, like just do it at this point. Like 28.5 in dead cap, like kick that on a little bit further. I don't know. I don't know. I can't picture Kirk Cousins outside of the Viking purple, but it's just because of the way that team is built around him. Atlanta isn't hurting for offensive weapons, and it might restore Kyle Pitts' value and even Drake London's value, and it might up Bijan Robinson's value. So all speculation at this point. He does have ties to Atlanta, so it's educated speculation, but it's I think those are the only two spots he goes. There's a rumor out there that he would consider Washington too, but Washington I think needs a lot more. They also don't have a tight end that he could throw to. And I do believe that he does like playing in a dome, and Washington definitely doesn't have a dome either. So it's Atlanta and Minnesota seem to be the two finalists, in my opinion. And I believe that he will choose between those two. And it's interesting that they both have domes and both have relatively ready-made offenses.
Yeah, I think it's between those two. I mean, there could be a third team out there that might
Mystery.
try to get his interest. I just don't see Washington as a realistic option. I don't think he would want to go there, but just to entertain the idea, if they signed him and they had the second overall pick, they could then trade the second overall pick for a bounty for a team trying to get a rookie quarterback, and they could basically rebuild, retool their team that way. However, I don't think he wants to go back there. I don't think he has fond memories of his last few days, last few seasons there. So I think he's totally done with them. Not a good tax situation either. So I could see him going either staying in Minnesota, or going to Atlanta. I think if you want to get crazy, he could maybe go to Miami instead of them re-signing Tua. They could sign Kirk Cousins, but I don't think that that's on the table right now.
All right. So we are on some Kirk Cousins watch, but let's switch topics to a quarterback that you might have a little bit of speculation about there, Alex, and I'll let you take it away because this is all you here.
There's been talk that if Kirk Cousins leaves Minnesota, that potentially Trey Lance would be an option to go to Minnesota as the replacement, which doesn't make any sense to me because Trey Lance has no trade value right now. The Cowboys got him for I think a fourth round pick or later, and maybe even just a seventh. And he hasn't played. Like we haven't seen him play at all. So his value did not go up. So the only if there's a Dallas quarterback going, so right now, Dak Prescott in Dallas has for some reason they've not come to a restructure. They've not come to a renegotiation and extended his contract. I don't know why. He has currently a $59 million cap hit, but he only has 1 year left. So Jerry has insinuated, he said, he's talked out both sides of the mouth. He's previously said Dak is going to be our quarterback, but lately he's been insinuating that he might play out this year, which doesn't make any sense because why wouldn't you extend him at this point if you're going to keep him and lower your cap hit so you can re-sign some players or sign some free agents? There's been no movement, so it's potentially they could decide to move on from Dak after a nearly MVP caliber season and get a bounty for him and rebuild, which would be wild. It's just pure speculation. I don't think that they're going to do it. I think they eventually cave and pay Dak, but it was just a thought. Jeff, I know that you think that's crazy, so go ahead and break it down.
So if the Cowboys moved off from Dak, then what? There is no then what right now, and that makes them very irrelevant. And there's teams like the Carolina Panthers that have been struggling to find a quarterback for years now, and they're still struggling. And a team with a quarterback is just going to let him walk away when he is at a near MVP level right now. I don't see it. They have one of the best wide receivers in the game, and his contract's coming up as well. And the only way you're going to be able to keep him is if you have a quarterback to get him the ball. And we'll see what happens, but I don't see anyone trading for Dak, and I also don't see Dak ever being available for trade. So
It's just interesting because it depends on how you view Dak. And most people are split about 50-50, where some people think he's the top quarterback in the league, and I think you're one of them. And some people think that he is kind of an average to above average quarterback in the league and has just had some recent good stats, but is replaceable. And I think if you're the Dallas Cowboys and you think that Dak is not the guy who can win playoff games, I think you got to pull the trigger now because if they extend him, there's no going back, and he's a Cowboy until his contract's up. So I think now would be the time to do it if you're going to. And I think a team like Minnesota or like the Raiders, who have the 11th overall pick and I think the 12th overall pick or something like that, they both have upper middle first round picks. They could trade you a bounty. Then Dallas would draft a quarterback in this loaded draft, someone that they like, where they could trade up. They have
they'll hit on one for sure.
well, I mean, they have a chance of having a quarterback for the next 7 years under reasonable contract, and under control, team control for like 7 years. So I
But
mean, it's
he'll
possible.
definitely be as good as Dak.
Well, Dak wasn't a first round pick. Dak was a fourth round pick. Maybe he was a late third, compensation third. Anyway, he was a mid round quarterback, and I think that he has done very well for being a mid round quarterback. And I think that there are really talented quarterbacks in this draft that are more talented on paper than Dak. But like you said, like you're pointing out, I mean, you know what you have in Dak. You don't know what
Yeah.
these prospects are. Like they might have higher potentials and higher ceilings, but you won't know until they hit the field. So that's the risk you pay. And on top of that, his cap hit would go up to 61 million instead of 59 if you traded him. So but it would all basically be up front. it'd all be right now. So it would just be interesting if that's the way they went. This is really their only time to do it, and if they don't do it now, then he's the quarterback until his next contract's done.
All right, we will see what happens, but obviously you don't want to move off a sure thing for a lottery ticket, because the worst thing the Cowboys could become is irrelevant, and they are very relevant right now, especially as Jerry gets up there in age.
Yeah, was he 81 right now or something like that?
Yeah, he's not going to go to the island of irrelevancy right now. He's going to stay right where he's relevant.
Yeah, but there's a good chance that he's just trying to find any kind of leverage he can to try to negotiate with Dak, but Dak pretty much has all the leverage right now.
He sure does.
Okay, we've got several releases to talk about, and we can go through these pretty quickly. The Chiefs released Marquez Valdez Scantling to clear $12 million. This is something that we mentioned could happen in the last episode, and it literally happened after we recorded. So that was interesting. I don't know if it's just to be able to re-sign their defensive players or whether they'll bring in a receiver to fill in that cap, but it seemed like a no-brainer. MVS has not been a very good wide receiver, so I think that was kind of a bust signing in my opinion. I don't know how you
Yeah,
feel about it.
I mean, they won 2 Super Bowls with him, so I mean,
Not
bust,
because
bust,
of
Super Bowl,
him.
Super Bowl. Yeah.
Not because
um,
of him.
I know, I know, but this is money that I said that I thought they could save and go sign a guy like Gabe Davis, and here we are. One half of it is already done, and we will see what they do with the other half of it going forward. But they clearly need a number 2 option behind Rashee Rice, and Kadarius Toney's not it. Sky Moore's not it. Watson's not it, and Justin Ross isn't it. So they definitely need to work on that second option opposite of Rashee Rice. Rashee Rice is really going to help for a bit until Kelsey retires, because that will keep a cheap number 1 wide receiver on the roster.
Yeah, I think they probably draft a wide receiver right now. I think that's the way they're leaning at this point. It wouldn't surprise me if they picked up a second or third tier wide receiver in the free agency market, but I think they're trying to spend their money on their defense and trying to draft offense.
Agreed. Agree there. So we'll see what happens, but obviously some cap space just opened up for somewhere in in the football world for the Chiefs. All right. We have a big cut coming here of Vikings cutting their starter last year, their starting running back, Alexander Madison. So this is the first son to drop from Cousins and Son, which Cousins might drop from that as well in the next week or so. But this is a pretty big deal because I do think they're going to go in a different direction at running back this upcoming year. And right now, it does look like Ty Chandler is in the driver's seat. And I know, as you know, Alex, in our Dynasty League, we have a very clear argument over who the starter was between Madison and Chandler. And so far, I am winning that argument right now.
Yeah, that's with a different owner, but I think that it's interesting that 2 years in a row, the Vikings have released their starting running back. So they released Dalvin Cook for Alexander Madison. Now they're releasing Alexander Madison for potentially Ty Chandler. And they might bring in somebody else, but of the guys they currently have on their roster, Ty Chandler is the guy that's most likely to take the lead in carries. I don't know if Cam Akers is going to stick around on that roster either. I don't know if they bring in a higher priority guy. I think that someone like Swift or another running back of that ilk could be a good guy to add, or they could go into the draft and bring in another guy too. So I'm not convinced that Ty Chandler can do it all himself yet, but I mean, if he puts up some good performances, I can start believing in it.
Right. So that does it for the pass catching and pass running options as far as receivers and running backs go. Now we have a slew of tight ends, and we can kind of discuss them all together here. But the Commanders released tight end Logan Thomas. The Seahawks released tight end Will Dissly. The Panthers released tight end Hayden Hurst post June 1st, which will free up $2.1 million in the 2024 cap. And the Jets released tight end CJ Uzama. So this tells me right now is a bad time to be a veteran, non-productive tight end. Out of the 4 here, which do you think hurt the most?
Like hurt the team, hurt the player, hurt fantasy. Like what?
The
What do you
team.
mean?
The team. Anybody
I
get a
mean,
downgrade?
well, I think the Seahawks. I'm not sure that they have a tight end on the roster anymore because pretty sure Noah Fant is a free agent right now. I don't think they've re-signed him. So they cut Will Disley, so I don't know who the tight end would be. They might be on the hunt for a tight end in free agency or in the draft. And
Yeah,
Logan Thomas has just never panned out, as far as I know, as far as I can tell. Like he's always been one of basically any Commander's tight end has had a lot of promise, gone through a bunch of injuries. I think only Chris Cooley really panned out of all the guys on the Commanders over like the last 2 decades. So I don't think that really hurt them that bad.
absolutely. And I think Hayden Hurst, I'm not really sure what's going to happen with his career post concussion. So that's the most surprising one, just given how much guaranteed money he had going into this year. But the rest really don't surprise me. Logan Thomas is up there in age now, so just where we are at with that. Right. We can move on to our last two news items before getting into the combine. The NFL is looking to pitch an 18-game season to the NFLPA. How do you think that will go over to the NFLPA? And just keep in mind that it probably does mean more player injuries, more fatigue throughout the season, which will lead to more injuries. And what do you think the NFL might have to give up to get this 18th game?
I think they're going to have to move to a second bye week. So I think they'll have 2 bye weeks for each team. I think that obviously everyone's going to get a little bit more money for that extra week. I hope that they get something else useful out of it. Like maybe they can remove the franchise tag, or they can maybe make the franchise tag only 1 year. I mean, they've got to come up with something to try to negotiate, because the league cannot add an 18th game per what we understand of the current CBA. So they've got to get something, right, Jeff?
Yeah, I don't as you've said, I don't know if it's the tag, I don't know if it's drug testing lowering, I don't know if it's taking away punishment from Roger Goodell and that hearing that they have. I don't really know what the NFL is going to be willing to give up to get this 18th game, which is going to be very lucrative. It's also going to restore balance of the 9 home games, 9 away games. So I do believe that one of the things that the NFL will have to give up in this is a second bye week. And what that'll do is keep players a little more fresh as the season goes on. So there'll be one early and one late bye week for each of the players. This will also extend the fantasy season an extra week as well, which always will excite me.
Yeah, but fantasy players, we might have to extend our roster sizes to account for everyone getting hurt.
Absolutely. Or make bigger injured reserves.
Hmm.
All right. We will see what happens. Last time that this happened, what the NFL got to move it to 17 games because it was part of the CBA. So they did that in March of 2021 for the 2021 season. So we're in March of 2024. Will they get it done in time for the league to include it in this year's schedule? That is kind of where the clock is ticking for the NFL. But we all knew back in 2021 that 18 games was the goal. Like 17 wasn't the end game. But it's funny that I say that because now that we've moved to 17, we're probably going to move to 18. I think 18 is it for a while. Like I don't see it going up from 18 anytime soon.
Yeah, I think that they should leave it there. Jeff, is that the only change that's coming?
Oh, no, it's not. So the NFL is also working with the competition committee and the special teams coordinators to change the kickoff. So that means that a couple of things. So the onside kick will be null and void until the fourth quarter. It needs to be clearly identified and it only can be from a team that's trailing. So that is a little bit different here. But I think less than 5% of onside kicks have been recovered. So this isn't going to be that big of a deal. When they do onside kicks in the fourth quarter, they're able to do stacked lines. So it doesn't have to be an even number on each side. So it could increase the amount of recoveries from the onside kicks that happen. So the plan is to try to use the XFL version, which means that only the kicker and the returner can move until the ball is touched. Well, pre-play, the defenders, so the kick team is going to be lined up at the opposing 40, and the return team is going to be lined up at the 35. So at most, there'll be a 5-yard run. And so basically, that'll prevent people from running full speed into each other. Now, to add to some of the complexity of this, they're talking about items of touchback in this as well. So there could be different varieties of touchbacks. So number one, if they don't get the ball inside the box, which is over the 20-yard line, then that is considered out of bounds and the opposing team would get it at the 40. So you can't short kick or squib kick or anything like that. So if the ball doesn't get inside the 20, then they would automatically get it at the 40. Now, if the ball bounces at the 5 and bounces into the end zone, there's a talk where the opposing team would the return team would get it at the 20. And then the third option on this is if they kick it into the end zone and out of the end zone or out of the end zone, that the return team would get it at 35. So they're trying to get rid of that automatic touchback out of this game. So we'll see what the final proposal looks like, but this is clearly a great upgrade to the game. Like they didn't really like how the kickoff was going, as we mentioned last week, and so now they're going to revamp it and try to get as more kickoffs in the game, which we might go from 1 to 2 kickoffs per game to 7 to 8 kickoffs returned per game. So that's just one more exciting play per kickoff. So no more knees, no more fair catches. And what are your thoughts on that, Alex? It seems a little complex, but I'm sure we'll get used to it kind of quickly.
Yeah, I'll have to see examples of it. I'm a visual learner. So we'll see how that plays out, and if that makes a significant difference. I'd like to see some more excitement on kickoffs for sure.
All right. So now we get to move to your favorite portion of today, and that is the combine, where you get to talk about risers and fallers. Alex, we'll start with the quarterback position.
So as a lot of you probably know, the top three quarterbacks sat out of the drills. So Drake May, Williams, Jaden Daniels, they didn't participate in the drills aspects, but they did meet with teams, they did do interviews, they did talk to the media, and they said a lot of the right things. From what I've heard, Drake May made the best impression in interviews of those three. So I think because before the combine, he seemed like he was falling down mock draft boards. I don't know if that reflects the actual NFL evaluators' opinions or if it's just media people, but I think he's still in the top two conversation for most NFL people. There weren't really any fallers or any significant fallers, so of the ones that actually did the testing, JJ McCarthy out of Michigan and Michael Penix Jr. out of Washington, they're the ones who performed really well in testing as well as in actual drills. And a lot of people came out of this weekend as thinking that McCarthy has risen to potentially a top 5 prospect. So he might be taken in the top 5. To me, that's still a little high for him, but I can understand why, because from his game film to what you see in drills to all of that, there's not enough to be 100% sure on tape, but there's enough that you can convince yourself of anything, and he's the only quarterback out of this entire group who's played in a pro-style offense, who has played behind center, whereas most of them have just played mostly shotgun, and he's the only one that has made a lot of the reads that he has and reading coverages, and he's the most successful on converting third downs. So I can see it. Michael Penix Jr., I think he's probably still a first round or early second pick. JJ McCarthy could go anywhere from the top 5 to the middle of the second round. I have no idea at this point. But those are guys that made an impact from the quarterback position, from the wide receiver position. Marvin Harrison didn't do any drills. I don't think that that's changed his draft stock at all. I think he's still most likely the first wide receiver taken in the draft. But some risers were actually both the University of Texas wide receivers Xavier Worthy and Adonai Mitchell. Xavier Worthy broke the 40-yard dash record, so he ran a 4.21. Now that doesn't mean as much as you think. The 40-yard dash probably is the least important drill to run, but it's still cool to see how fast they can go. He is really small though. Like you think Tank Dell last year, who was 5'8", 5'9", and 165 pounds. Xavier Worthy is 5'11" and 165 pounds, so he's very, very thin. A lot of his touches with Texas that were manufactured short yardage touches to try to get him to get yards after the catch. So I don't know how successful he is if he was put on the outside a lot, and I don't think that he has the same level of route running that Tank Dell had, but I think he's faster than Tank Dell. I don't think he did enough to actually go in the first round. I know a lot of people are trying to mock him there just purely on speed. I think he's probably a second rounder in the real NFL draft. And Adonai Mitchell, though, I think he's bigger, but his athletic score ended up being much higher than Xavier Worthy because of Adonai Mitchell's size. He's like 225 pounds and scored high in basically every measurable. So that was really good to see. He looks better on film. He is a smoother route runner, in my opinion, and he looks like he can be an X type receiver. He looks like he could be the guy. And I think that teams in the bottom of the first round, especially the Buffalo Bills and Kansas City Chiefs, are going to be targeting someone like him at the bottom of the first round. So I really like him a lot. Brian Thomas, who I think is the fourth best receiver in this draft, also had a good showing at the combine, and he's had on film, he's had moments where I thought he was the best person on the field for LSU, and that includes Malik Neighbors and Jaden Daniels. So there's been times I've really liked him more than those guys. And I think he's very young and he's still growing. So he could have a better career than Malik Neighbors, which is interesting. Ricky Pearsall out of Florida had a really good combine as well and showed his athleticism. I think he was probably a late day two, early day three guy, and now he's probably going for sure day two. Ladd McConkey out of Georgia is someone who I think would have been a second round pick before and probably is now a high second round pick because I think he did do a good job in the combine. I think his film looks good as well. He might even end up going at the bottom of the first. I think all of those guys did a really good job. Fallers for me, Malachi Corley, who was previously someone to watch, randomly decided to sit out of drills, and people were kind of shocked by that. So he could have brought himself up higher if he did well. I think that he hurt himself, and he might fall to a day three pick. So I think that he didn't do himself any favors. He has to have a really good pro day to restore his value. Troy Franklin, I think, is a little bit mixed. He didn't test as athletic as you'd want. He had a pretty good 40 time, but his drills weren't very good, and he scored pretty low in the drills. And wide receivers have a drill called the gauntlet, where it puts them in game time situations where they need to make good catches. He didn't look good on any of those catches. He didn't position his body well. And they also record game speed throughout that. So they have GPS chip where they're tracking how fast players are going. This is a drill that Puka Nacua did really well in last year, and Troy Franklin did not do very well in that. So I am fading him. I think he's a faller. He was almost in the first round conversation. Some people did have him in the first round in their mock drafts. I think he's going to go probably late second round, early third round at this point, and I'd be shocked if he goes in the first round. Keon Coleman out of Florida State, I think that he only kind of fell a little bit. His 40 time didn't test very well, but that's not the most important drill. I think he did better in the other competitions. He has the size and measurables you want in an X receiver, and he has solid but not great game film. I think he could still be bottom of the first round, top of the second uh, in the NFL draft. So running backs, Jalen Wright out of Tennessee did really well, looked athletic. He's someone who I like a lot of his film. I've been high on a lot of skill players out of Tennessee lately, but I think he might end up being one of the better running backs in this draft class, along with Trey Benson out of Florida State, Marshawn Lloyd out of USC, and a surprise name that came out of nowhere, but Isaac Garadino out of Louisville tested really well in the combine, and he now has gone from basically an undrafted free agent to maybe even a high day three, low day two spot, which is good enough for a lot of running backs. So he's someone to keep an eye on as we get closer to the draft. It might be like a dark horse deep sleeper. Fallers, Audric Estime out of Notre Dame um, was super slow. Had a 4.71 40 time, which, like I said, it's not the most important drill, but that is very, very slow. And he tested pretty poorly in the other drills as well. I don't think that he's going to go very high in drafts. Bucky Irving was the running back I was most disappointed with out of Oregon. He just didn't look explosive at all. He looked very pedestrian, and he's someone that, for being 185 pounds and being a little bit on the smaller side, being a receiving type back, he needed to show speed, and he just didn't, and he didn't have the explosiveness. So it's hard to trust him. I don't think he was ever going to be as good as Jahmyr Gibbs, but now he's looking kind of like a poor third down back at this point. So he went from being like a top second round pick in rookie drafts to probably being mid to late third round. And those guys don't always pan out. Dylan Johnson out of Washington didn't do very well, in my opinion, but I wasn't super high on his film. Braylon Allen out of Wisconsin was someone people were high on before the combine, and I don't think he did himself any favors. He looked kind of slow. Cody Schrader out of Missouri was surprising that he didn't do very well on his drills either. He looked really good in the Senior Bowl from the flashes that I saw, but he ran a 4.61 40, wasn't fast enough. He just looked like he bulked up too much, and I didn't see any of the speed or fluid movements, and I think that he's now a day 3 pick, so not high on him anymore. Tight ends. So Brock Bowers stays the same. I think that Sanders out of Texas is the number 2 tight end in that class, and we're trying to see who the guys besides those two are. And Theo Johnson at Penn State basically broke the athletic scoring. He got a perfect score, and if there was a score higher than perfect, he might have gotten it based off of his athletic testing in the combine. I think he's someone who could be a sneaky get in fantasy drafts. I think that Dynasty especially, I would go after him. I think he could be someone who breaks out in the next year or two. Ben Sinnott out of Kent State also did really well in the combine too. So I think he's someone who could also be someone to target in Dynasty as well. Wasn't really any fallers from this group. Wasn't really high on the tight end class to begin with, so a lot of them had nowhere to fall.
Oh, that's a little surprising. Does seem like some of the experts are a little bit high on the tight end class this year.
It seems like they're getting higher, but it started like it was just going to be 2 guys and nothing, and now there could be a full grouping of like 5 or 6.
Yeah, they're talking about 2 first rounders, though, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
I
Or at
think to
least
me
a
there's only
first and a second rounder?
yeah, I think a first and a second rounder, and if scouts like Theo Johnson's film in addition to his athletic testing, I think there could be 2 second rounders. So I would say Bowers, high first round pick. I would say Sanders out of Texas, high second round pick. Theo Johnson could be a high second round pick too, at the highest.
Awesome. Well, great. And we know that with all these cuts at tight end, that teams are going to need them. So here we go.
Yeah, Seattle needs a tight end.
I think the Jets could use one. Carolina definitely could use one. Washington could use one. There's a lot of teams that could use a tight end, and I think that's why the Texans were so smart at re-signing Schultz this week.
Yep, but Hunter Henry could go somewhere, so we'll see if he signs somewhere.
You love him, and that's okay.
I don't love him. I didn't like him with the Chargers, but with the Patriots, when he's been healthy, he was actually productive.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's with on and off quarterback play.
Yep. All right. Do we have anything to add to this?
Nothing from me.
All right. Well, that does it for another episode of the Never Too Early Fantasy Football Podcast. Thank you all for downloading or listening to this episode. And please don't forget to like and subscribe. Please leave us a comment and share the show. Every little bit helps.
You can find us on all podcasting apps by searching N2E Fantasy and with our handle at N2E Fantasy on all social media platforms. Please join our community and give us a follow. Until next time, take care of yourselves and remember, it's truly never too early for fantasy football. Thank you again.
Bye, everybody.